It's so good to see you again today. This has been a rough morning for me because I got behind. I didn't get enough done yesterday because I was having too much fun. I was at a hockey game I don't like to say an old friend because he's a little bit older than me, but I like to say a friend of long standing. We go back 50 years. And one of the questions that had come up in our discussion afterwards, we sat and IHOP for hours and after the hockey game, and I really did enjoy it. And his team won, so that was nice. But we discussed for hours about the church as it is today and the church as it will be going forward. And we both agreed that we got to figure out a way to do something better. We recognize that the church of today is not doing as we expected it would do by doing what we've always done. And if we've done what we've always done, we're going to get the same results going forward. And my pastor friend said that he'd put somebody who'd come to him saying, how do I get a discipleship program going in my church? How do I get these people built up? And I'm very thankful that he passed along that my contact information and then said, well, I suppose he could watch it online. Yeah. And I'm willing to interact with him personally as well. You see, the difficulty is in that particular church, which is a significant church. It's typical. It's had its ups and downs, but it's nowhere near the dumpster. The problem often is that we just have a hard time finding people who will raise their hand and say, let me lead. And I believe that that's because we start, as I describe, on the sixth rung of the ladder. So I went back and I pulled out my old copy of this and I started to read it. And I said, you know what, that needs to be updated because this is really good to teach people where they're going today. What's happening today is that the people who raise their hand are kind of militant often, and they want to change the whole world. And in fact, they want all of the society to line up with Christian values. It takes me back to a fight that we had, I guess it was in the 1970s, over Sundays, whether Sundays should be an open day. And then the question came up, what about the Jewish people who want to celebrate their one day on Saturday? They can close their stores on Saturday, but open them on Sunday. And we think we want the stores closed on Sunday because it'll be good for the workers. It would be good for the workers. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was we wanted to get the world to be squeezed into our Christian mold. And I found it so ironic that people would go and sit in, well, typically the Christian place to go then it's an old style restaurant, still around, good chicken. That's where we meet for our church. But go to Swiss Chalet and talk about there ought to be a law that says that people can't work on Sunday while we were eating the chicken that was cooked in that restaurant on Sunday by people who weren't in church. That rigidity is something that Jesus pushed back against. So that's where we're going today. And I decided to entitle this lesson, Have a Good Day, because that's what Jesus wanted us to do, is to have a good day. But we can't impose our good day on the rest of the world. It gets really complicated when you live in a place like we live here in Brampton, Ontario, where there are more Hindus, yes, and more Sikhs and more Muslims than there are Christians. And they have their own special festivals as well. So in addition to our historic, Christmas holidays and Easter and so on, they get to have their days off in addition. Well, that's not fair. Oh, people, I don't want to sort that out. I don't care about sorting that. I don't think that's what we should be focusing on. I don't think that we should be trying to reshape the government into our way of thinking. I think we should be reshaping the church into Jesus' way of thinking. So today we're going to look at Sunday. And it was Sabbath. And the early church, apparently, just a couple of indicators on this, moved their separate day from what we would call Saturday, they called it the Sabbath, to Sunday. And there's some people today who say, well, that's not a legitimate ship. We should worship on Saturday. You know what? I appreciate what they're thinking, but I'm not sure that it's ever worth the battle to try and figure it out whether we're right or they're right, because that's kind of not even a second degree issue. It's a third degree issue to me. And there are things that I'd rather worry about. One of the things that I worry about is getting our 12 trained up. And A.B. Bruce in 1870 wrote that book, and he stimulated me to rethink it and to help you rethink it going forward. So we're going to go through a variety of slides, and I'm going to give you some tips on this. I'm going to come back with some conclusions that I personally think are practical and useful, and I want you to think them through. You could say, Carter, you're nuts. That's okay, because some of the things I'm going to say are not from the scripture. They're from my head, trying to sort things out from the scripture. But the key thing is that with breakthrough pathways, first of all, we want to break through. That's a word that says, whoa, we got through a wall. I think we need to get through a wall. But I don't think that it just happens spontaneously. I think that you have to direct in some measure, not with a rigid curriculum, but in some measure to help people steer their lives in a direction where they slowly start to see, oh, maybe, and then they adopt this particular pathways that we talk about, 13 of them that we have put into our book. And then they say, wow, I see a change in my life since I have been paying attention to this particular methodology or mechanism or pathway that we use in life. I think it would be terrific. See, what happens when somebody comes to Christ early on, and particularly young people, is they say, okay, I'll get rid of my old rules. What are my new set of rules? And it's not a rules-based economy that Jesus was building. And that's why Bruce, early in his book, brings up these three things that were rigid in their economy, their Jewish-based economy. And he says, no. There's some principles behind those things that you want to hold, but there's some other things that you can hold loosely. See, what we need to do, generally speaking in life, is develop a set of bright line rules, the things that we won't cross. And you can summarize them, if you will, in the 10 Commandments. And some would argue that the Sabbath doesn't belong in the 10 Commandments anymore because it's not repeated in the New Testament. I'm not buying that argument, but I do appreciate that there's some point to be made on that side of things. What we are doing, what we need to do, is find a way to take young people to know where the bright lines are, the things that they will just not transgress in their life, and they can be personal and individual and designed by the individual, things that they just will not consider. See, I have found in my life, and you'll find this in your life, if you sit down and say, will I or won't I? There's a high degree of probability, if it's will I or won't I, that if it's a good idea, you'll think of a way to put it off. And if it's a bad idea, you'll jump right to it and do it. Don't ask that question. Set the pattern up before you get there more often than not. And of course, sometimes the question is always there to face, will I or won't I demonstrate love in this way, in this time, in this pattern, to this person? Okay, book coming out soon. I hope next week. Don't shoot me if I don't get it out by next week. Richard and I have been debating back and forth about this thing. We've worked on this for over a year. And sometimes he says to me, I don't understand what you're saying here. And I said, well, what your question is here. And usually we come to, well, I think always we've come to a meeting of the minds that, no, this is what we want to say. And with this is how we think it will be taken on the other side. Now, what we're going to do when we publish this book is we're going to get it out to several people who will be print copies in their hands and ask them to reflect on it, whether we're explaining things improperly or incompletely. And maybe we've missed something. Right now, we got 13 pathways that we think are a pattern for breakthrough. We've considered adding some others, and maybe we will if we get pressured to, but we'll get there. So what we want you to do is stay tuned. We want you to be with us on this, and we recognize that there needs to be some form of radical shift in the life of the church that's in decline going forward, and we want you to be a part of that.
Attendance is down, communities are disconnected, and many wonder what's next. At Breakthrough Pathways, We believe the answer isn't. In more programs or professionals, it's in you, ordinary people making a real difference.
So I'm blind every Thursday at 10 a.m. for real conversation, real solution, and a renewed vision for the future of the church. Let's build something that lasts. Subscribe today and be part of the breakthrough.
Okay, let's get into it here. First of all, 3 chapters here in this book had to do with maintaining rituals. The Jews were really big on rituals, and we've become really big on some rituals in the church today. And maybe I'll describe some of those as we get towards the end when we get to the practical. You know what I'm saying. But today we're going to talk about what Bruce said about observing the Sabbath, and on top of that, what difference it makes to us. Now, there is power in keeping things the same. It's a kind of a shorthand in our brain that's really useful for us. I mean, you don't think about the ritual that you have. I hope you have. There's a brushing your teeth. But do you realize that your ritual in brushing your teeth, you always put the toothbrush in the same side of your mouth every time? That's the habit you've developed. I hope you have. Now, you only have to floss the teeth you want to keep. And right now, I've lost a few, or I'm losing a few. I got one that needs a crown, needs some work on it. But I brushed my teeth faithfully since I was taught that as a child. It's, in a sense, a ritual that I sort of enjoy it. You know, I have this electric toothbrush, and Wendy laughs at me. I brush my teeth, and I walk around the house while I'm brushing my teeth, dribbling toothpaste on my shirt sometimes. It's a good thing to have things that are rituals that are positive in your life. But you've got to understand that there's also some liabilities if the rituals don't make sense and they're based just on rigidity that makes you feel more comfortable because it's the way you've always done it, or it's the way your parents taught you, or it's the way your particular church designs things. Now, I believe that if you want to design a church where everybody wears a uniform of whatever red plaid suits, you could probably find enough people to join you in that. But why would you? You want to make sure that you recalibrate constantly in the life of your church and change, even imperceptibly to some, but change from where you are to a better future. Now, I'm not for, by and large, taking the approach of revolution, where you come in and say, okay, all bets are off. Everybody's got to wear red plaid suits starting next Sunday. You know, sometimes novices in ministry say, well, I'm going to start a church, and at my church, everybody's going to be totally committed. Good luck with that. See, in our book, we talk about chosen apprentices, and everybody is designed to be a chosen apprentice by God when they come to Jesus. But frankly, most people don't live it out very well. We want to help with it. Start people where they are, not asking them to sign a 2-year covenant in blood where they'll meet every, Thursday morning at 6 a.m., shredded wheat, no milk, we're tough. No. We want something that comes from the heart. There's power in ritual, positive and negative. But so the core issues that were at stake as far as Jesus was concerned, including this business of the Sabbath, was he wanted them to have a shift in thinking from a rules-based performance to a heart-based performance, where it came from the heart and the specifics didn't matter a whole lot. So the Sabbath became a controversy in the gospel between Jesus and the Pharisees 6 times. And during those times, there were things like they picked on the disciples for plucking grain because that was reaping on the Sabbath, and that was against the law. They railed against Jesus for healing on the Sabbath because that was work, and you're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath. These rules were missing the spirit of the Sabbath and what it was for. They focused on crazy little details, and as Jesus said, they'd strain out the gnat and swallow the camel. You don't understand that? Go look it up. While neglecting the weightier matters of the law, the mercy and the love, the justice that we designed there. Jesus has a viewpoint on this, and while the Pharisees had their viewpoint, he not only has a viewpoint, he declares quite specifically, now how arrogant is this if it isn't true? He says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And he says, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Like, come on, people. But you've got to recognize that Jesus either has the authority or he doesn't. But he said that the Sabbath is supposed to be something that is not a burden to you, but it's something that will enhance your life. It's designed for your physical and spiritual well-being. Something going on here. I can't read it. No, I don't want to do that. Okay. So Jesus uses reasoning, and this is an important thing for you to build into as you try to raise up other people. His reasoning was based on, first of all, his approach was not based on clamping down, I said so. He uses reasoning going from what was commonly held with the Pharisees, in this case about David, who they revered, and how he behaved. And even looking at their own situation, they pulled an animal out of a pit on a Sabbath day. So they already didn't, with absolute certainty, keep the Sabbath. You know, we're right now, I'm recording this, we're in the month of Ramadan, and our Muslim friends, when they follow Ramadan properly, they don't eat during the day. And at sundown, then they eat, and then at sunrise, they have another meal. And this kind of is a reset button for them to get back to the principles. But even at that, if they forget and go back to their regular habits during the day and have a sip of something or eat something, as soon as they remember it, they stop, they're not held guilty for that. Interesting. Because they recognize that people are always a little bit of mess up, and we always make mistakes and do things. Even in a rigid, rules-based economy created by Muhammad for the Muslims, he recognized we'll be somewhat imperfect about it. Why should it be any different for us as believers? Now, Jesus is quite certain here that he has the authority to deal with and interpret what should be carried over from the Old Testament to the New Testament without it becoming a legalistic burden. So, you want to teach people, you're up on the sixth rung of the ladder, and you're looking down through the people in your church. You want to, through your messages, and particularly, and I hopefully more through this, through your individual or small group conversations with people, you help them to turn away from the rigidity that some will want to set for them. You see, there always has been, and there is today, a tendency for Christians to say, I'm hard-nosed on this. And then they fight on it and can't accept that the other person has a slightly different viewpoint or a radically different viewpoint without getting angry about it, without bursting in on the conversation and saying, oh, you're wrong. Well, you might be wrong, but you're not going to change it by yelling at them. So you've got to figure out how to not be rigid in your thinking while knowing where the bright lines are, things that you should not, will not violate. And you've got to recognize, and we've said this before, you're going to have some controversy. If you stand firm as Jesus stood, firm but not rigid, you are going to have some controversy because some people in your church are going to think that you've got it wrong. Now, there are some things that you may have wrong and some things that they may have wrong. And they may say, well, the Bible doesn't say you can't do that. Well, you know, the Bible does say stay away from all the appearance of evil. So if something looks like it's bad, that really means that, you know, while it may not be bad for you, if it looks like it's bad to others, then, you know, you're probably best to just avoid that for the purposes of drawing them closer to their walk with Jesus. And always expect that evolution is going to be better than revolution. Don't blow things up, but try to change things all at once. A new friend yesterday say that as a principal in a school, when he went, he first of all thought, well, I can rearrange this lunchroom. And then he said, wait a minute, I'm the new guy here. These people have got their patterns, whether they're good or bad. I better not rearrange all the tables and upset things. That was a wise school principal. Because hurting teachers is like hurting cats. But I presume that he did much better because he was willing to be patient and willing to move slowly. And probably he ended up moving the tables over time. But he probably had to plant some seeds and would ask the people with some history and power in the pecking order in the row. Hey, do you think it'd be better if we put that table under the window or whatever it was that he wanted to do? I didn't discuss it that deeply with him, but I'm sure that he discussed it with people and said, I think it would be more, it would facilitate me helping to keep peace and order and give a good approach in our school. If so and so and such, do you think that would help? And gradually plant the seeds and let them grow. Evolution, not revolution. You want to be like Jesus, then, that's pretty much the way he approached things. He gave reasons and he defended his disciples for picking the grain on the Sabbath. What's the big deal? But over time, he was very firm, but at the same time, he wasn't so rigid. In fact, the first thing that he had to do with these disciples to get them to actually get out there and fish for people was to realize that their rigidity was an enemy of reaching people. So, what are we going to do now? Well, first of all, I think that we have to develop an awareness of our patterns and our rules. I go back to what I mentioned, that Christians crowding into Swiss Chalet back in the day and arguing about this restaurant. They didn't want to go to a restaurant that had a liquor license. They thought that the stores should all be closed on Sunday. Now they go to the same Swiss Chalet, which of course has a liquor license, but so they treated it like a bright rule, but they can have a personal rule of abstaining from alcohol without imposing it on others. Actually, I personally believe that if you look at all of the data, the worst drug on the planet, and this is all the data, the worst drug on the planet is alcohol. And yet we've authorized it in our society and also in our churches. But I'm not going to make that a Christian rule. I'm going to say that that's a societal rule that just looks at the society with wisdom to recognize, well, if I do that, then people might do that, and they might not be able to handle what I can handle. So I'm better off just to cut that out of my life. And that could be all sorts of things. It might be things that emerge out of whatever, an expanded version of, I'll pick on Netflix, but there's so many other streaming services that are eating up the time of people that they could be getting on the telephone, walking down the street and saying hello to somebody and having a nice relationship with people. We need to develop an awareness in addition of our present habits. First of all, the idea of the Sabbath came way before the law. This was in creation. God didn't really need to have rest on the seventh day. He could have had a 6-day week and say, get right to it, people. But he rested on the Sabbath day. You want to think about that. Yeah, on the seventh day, he rested. And that, I believe, was teaching us that we too need to deal with a pattern of a 7-day cycle to the degree we can. Now, if you're in a healthcare working situation or something like that, we work, 10 days on and 4 days off, and the Sundays don't always align for you. Like, I'm scream and holler about that, but you might want to say, you know what? I need to get that 1 day in 7 set for me because it's kind of like smoking cigarettes. Back when I grew up, people smoked cigarettes, thought nothing of it, and then they proved that it was killing people. So we say, well, people shouldn't smoke. Well, and then we said, well, you can't smoke on the inside of these buildings. And then you can't smoke anywhere except in your own home where you plaster the walls with nicotine and so on. People still smoke. We can't stop them from doing that. But it's the same thing with any habit that may not be productive for us. All things, the Bible says, all things are lawful for me. I can do anything, but all things are not expedient and they don't edify. So Paul said that twice now. And we need to think about that. So I would argue that we need to think about our 1 day in 7 as being separate. Now, if you're in the ministry, like I've been in the ministry all my life, that separation might be a little different than your separation, but I think that Wendy and I have developed a reasonably good pattern. We'll never do our grocery shopping on Sunday, but that doesn't mean that we might not drop in to buy a loaf of bread in the grocery store on Sunday. Why? Because that's work. We'll never cut our grass on Sunday because that's something that will fit into the other 6 days of the week. And all sorts of things. I don't care if you decide to wash your car on Sunday and you find it restful. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to criticize you for that, but I'm not going to wash my car on Sunday. And wash my car. I let the rain wash my car. But we need to recognize that we need to set the patterns of that one day in 7 as different. Our difficulty in the world right now in terms of the demise of the church is that the mathematics are saying that the typical person who says, I'm an active Christian, attends church on the weekend or on Sunday, and I think Sunday, there's hunches that Sunday's the preferred day from Scripture. There's there are 17 Sundays a year is the typical number. Yeah, that's like 1.5 Sundays a month at best. Wait, you can't preach a sermon series. You can't keep your relationships going well. That's like when you get married, one of the things that happens is you can't be at your parents' house on Christmas Day because you're married and you have to go to your spouse's house on Christmas Day. So you probably work it out that you alternate weeks or years for who's there on Christmas Day, or maybe you say we don't go to either on Christmas Day. You have to work things out, but you want to make sure that you recognize that the hints of the Scripture are that one day in 7 is to be set aside with a focus on 2 things: worship, and that's the gathering of the people as a highlight day, not every piece of your Christian life, but a highlight day for a maximum number of people to gather together to share in the things of God. That makes a real difference when you don't just do it 17 times a year, but you do it as often as you can, and you don't let yourself devolve into a system where you say, no, on the weekends, whatever, I have to go to my kids' hockey game at the arena. But you do everything that you can to set that day aside as a special day, and that you set a day aside that day as a restful day, a rest from your regular patterns in life going forward. That's what needs to happen. And that needs to be taught early on in the Christian life. Let's see here. There's right. So this is what I want you to think about. I want you to think about how you're passing on by the patterns of your life good habits that others will want to replicate. Teach them to your children so they'll want to replicate them. That this will be from their heart, not that Daddy says I can't throw a ball on Sunday. Oh, for goodness sake. That was a rule that many people grew up with. You couldn't have any fun on Sunday. That's not true. That wasn't the design. You can have rest by playing with your kids, doing some other things. It needs to be a special day that's set aside for rest and for worship. And I want you to think about that. And I want you to join with us in this Breakthrough Pathways pattern. I want you to, we're developing. We're not there yet. This is a kind of a just-in-time system, but it's going to be really good.
The church is at a crossroads. Attendance is down, communities are disconnected, and many wonder what's next. At Breakthrough Pathways, we believe the answer isn't in more programs or professionals. It's in you, ordinary people making a real difference.
Join us live every Thursday at 10 a.m. for real conversation, real solution, and a renewed vision for the future of the church. Let's build something that lasts. Subscribe today and be part of the breakthrough.
Now, I want you to do that. I want you to get involved with this. I'm not even sure if there's a form for you to fill in yet. I can't remember. I'm going to do all this myself. I'm doing all the TV business. They talk about the talent, the people in front of the cameras, and the tech, the people behind the cameras. And there's many, many, many more people behind the cameras in the control rooms, and the producers setting up what's going to happen in the program, so on. And then there are out in front of the camera. Now, I have to do both. Happy to do both, but it's getting hard. And I hope and trust that you'll stay with me and make it a pattern to come and join live on Thursday. When I get an assistant here, we're going to have the chat box up and running where you can throw your comments and questions in. But I found that I can open up the chat box, but I can't manage it and still manage the slides and the software that's in front of me on the computer. And you'll recognize that sometimes I hit the wrong buttons. It just happens. But generally speaking, this is going to be useful. So I want you to pay attention to it. And I want you to pass it on to others, and preferably have a follow-up discussion with them and say, what did you think with Carter's thoughts on that? And what did you think with A.B. Bruce's thought? I don't always distinguish with you what I said and what he said. So I've got for you a modern version that's in production of this rather archaic language of all the things that A.B. Bruce said well over 100 years ago that are still relevant today and still relevant for the people that you need to raise up from the bottom, from ordinary people who start as recent converts. Don't appoint them to a leadership position, no matter how gung-ho they are. Make sure you kind of tune them up by investing time with them. Breakthrough Pathways is going to be putting them, the system that we've developed is a soft focus system that puts them with two other Christian people, hopefully somebody who's more mature and somebody who is less engaged, who can say all sorts of crazy things and be moderately and carefully corrected and tuned as they go, and understand the difference between a rules-based religion, which they all thought Christianity was, to the language of the heart. And it's Jesus' concept here. And we're moving on from this in the next weeks. We're moving on from this, but I want you to get this. It's the language of the heart that Jesus is interested in. It's how you love and relate to other people. Now, you want to read a good book on how to do that? Wendy and I wrote a great book, Bubble Up Church, but I'm not going to promote that now. You go look for it, Bubble Up Church. You can find it for Jeff Bezos' system, Amazon.com, Amazon.ca. It's there. You can read it where it goes through all of the one another's in the Bible. And we'll get to that with these people that we're working with. But that's not where we're starting. We're starting as close to where they are as we can. And as Jesus did with the disciples, take these fishermen who'd grown up in a rules-based economy and putting them into a heart-based economy. Stay with us. Why, but Lord willing, we'll see you again next week.